First item we have is introduction of bills. Did anyone have any bills? Seeing none. Committee, we also have minutes from January 12th, 13th, 19th, and 20th. If you, Senator Clay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move approval of the minutes for January 12th, 13th, 19th, and 20th, 2022.
Second by Senator Alley. Any discussion, questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next item we have on the agenda today is the judicial branch salaries. Stephanie Bunton, Administrator of Judicial Branch. Welcome, committee, Stephanie.
Good.
There. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Billinger and members of the committee for allowing me to be present and present today on an update on judicial branch personnel and budget. I am Stephanie Bunton, Judicial Administrator for the Judicial Branch. I want to start by where we left off last year on the appropriation you made to bring all employee salaries to last year's market rate by this July 1st. Oftentimes, I think people come before you and tell you what is going wrong, but I'm here today to tell you about something that has made a profound positive change for the judicial branch. Our local court administrators are reporting statewide that they are seeing some very qualified applicants, some of the best that they have seen in their careers. When I've been in local courthouses personally, I can attest that the morale is much improved. Offices are staffed. We are so grateful for your efforts because of the sensitive and technical nature of the work our employees perform. We are still struggling to fill entry-level positions because of the current market and economy. We're still having to compete with increasing wages from retail, fast food, and other entry-level commercial jobs. At the court, these entry-level positions are required to handle personally identifiable information, confidential information, and sealed documents. We need to be able to continue to attract the talent needed to carry out these core functions of government. We also thank you for the budget enhancements to backfill pandemic-related lost docket fee revenue and to create and fill new court services officers positions. And we appreciate your continued commitment to increasing judge pay. In our budget that we submitted this year, we did not include any additional salary increases above what you have already continued to appropriate or what you have committed to appropriating. We are included in the governor's budget for a cost of living adjustment, so we hope that any conversation about cost of living adjustments will include our employees and judges. So turning now to a little bit about the judicial branch budget, it is overwhelmingly personnel. Generally, more than 90% of our budget is used to fund our employees and judges. We have nearly 1,700 employees and judges, or 1,700 employees and 267 judges across the state of Kansas. That's in district courts and appellate courts and the appellate courts. We perform duties that are critical to public safety and that make a difference in the lives of our neighbors and fellow Kansans. So the judicial branch budget, while it is overwhelmingly for salaries, the counties fund the operating costs for district courts, including things like the buildings, the utilities, the office equipment, and supplies. The judicial branch budget is made up of several different funds, which includes the state general fund, fee funds, and grant and pass-through funds. They primarily pay for employees and judges in each of the 105 counties across Kansas. But we also have things in our budget such as funding for citizen review boards, the CASA program, which is the court-appointed special advocate programs, education and training for judicial branch employees and judges, municipal court training and municipal judge certification, administrative hearing officers used for child support enforcement, and technology improvements such as the electronic filing and development implementation of a statewide centralized case management system that you committed to funding several years ago. We're currently in the process of rolling that out and have about a third of the counties on the centralized case management system. We are embarking, or we have embarked on WorkShare across the state. So court clerks in Western Kansas have been able to help clerks in our urban areas. And we've seen, really good results with this, especially during the pandemic. So I also want to give you a preview of what to expect in our budget for fiscal year 2023 that we are going to be discussing this session. We have two proposals. The first is shifting the judicial branch away from fee funding, and the second is for more judges and employees. So first, I'll talk to you about the shift away from fee funding. We propose funding the judicial branch's core operations with state general fund, but we don't want to increase our overall expenditures. We would like to shift the deposit of these core fees, namely like our docket fees that currently fund our employees, to state general fund. So literally all we want to do is deposit the fees into a different account and get paid from that account instead. So on balance, in a traditional year, it is essentially a net neutral exchange. But this allows when there are fluctuations in docket fees to be absorbed by the state general fund. The second thing I want to talk about is additional judges and employees. In fiscal year 2020, the judicial branch worked with the National Center for State Courts to perform a weighted workload study for judges of the district court. The study was completed in fiscal year 2021. And then based on the results of that study, we reached out to our chief judges to discuss their needs under the weighted workload study. And it was determined that 13 district judges and 10 district magistrate judges are needed along with supporting staff. And supporting staff is 13 official court reporters and 13 administrative assistants. Our most dire need for the judges is in Sedgwick, Johnson, and Saline counties. So each of these counties would receive 3 new judge positions. 2 of those positions in Sedgwick County would be magistrate positions. Shawnee County would receive 2 magistrate positions. This is a first for both Sedgwick and Shawnee County to have magistrate positions. Cowley County would receive an additional magistrate position. And then also, in addition, 3 judicial districts have only 1 district judge in the entire district, with a district magistrate judge in all 6 counties. It makes it very hard for the 1 district judge in those judicial districts, who's also the chief judge and has administrative duties. It makes it hard for them to provide coverage for certain case types that must be heard by a district judge. So we are requesting 1 of those district magistrate positions be converted to a district judge position in each of those 3 judicial districts. And we've also requested 9 additional administrative assistants based on the weighted workload study from the National Center for State Courts. And then we've requested 4 additional staff positions because of efficiencies occurring at the district court level and the expansion of technology services statewide. So we've asked for an IT security position, which with the centralization of our case management system and the increased reliance on technology and remote applications, this has risen to the top as an urgent need, an elevated priority. This is a recommendation in a report as well that IT security be prioritized for the judicial branch. And then we've asked for a position for regional IT that would help our district courts with technology needs. We've also requested a position for an internal auditor to oversee financial audits and operational audits for the district courts, appellate courts, and other judicial branch departments, and a data analyst. So because we need data compilation, access, and analysis, and we want to be able to get you the data information that you need as requests come up. So we look forward to continued collaboration with you to ensure the judicial branch is equipped with the resources necessary to perform the critical functions of government. And with that, I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Stephanie. Questions? Senator Petty?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Stephanie, when you talked about the funding the judicial branch with state general funds, so this is basically a net neutral change?
We would expect that to occur over time. Our docket fees have fluctuated, and during the pandemic, they went down, but that we are seeing them starting to return to pre-pandemic levels. And so we would just be asking for an appropriation equal to what we get in a normal year from docket fees.
So, okay, so that would just be what, so how would that be looked at with the budget? Would we look at what the fees generated the year prior?
So we would ask, so if you look at over time, pre-pandemic, what was generated as an average over the last 2 to 3 years? So, yes.
We've done that in education, so that makes sense.
Senator Solentrum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Thanks for your presentation. Looking at your needs here, can you give us some insight as to where the court is in the handling of court cases due to COVID? As I understand, there might be a balloon of cases out there that will now or soon be taken up.
So,
Activity occurring. Help us out on where things are at.
So my understanding is that we're current on our cases except for criminal jury trials in our urban counties and in some mid-size areas. We've tried to use alternative dispute resolution means, criminal mediators, but there are some cases that still require jury trials. And so we can't. So we're working on that. We have had some difficulties with like when a witness gets COVID or a party in the case. So we're working through that. But I do, if you have any particular specific questions, I can get that information for you.
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
You say there's, a bubble out there on some of the criminal trials based on past history. Could you give us an indication of how big a bubble that might be? Are you going to see 10 or 20% more of these cases coming forward because of the delay of COVID? Or what can we kind of expect?
So I'd have to pull some information. What we are seeing is, some of the cases that are coming up for trial, they are entering into plea agreements. That's happening. So, we see this big bubble coming, and then there are plea agreements that occur, and so they don't actually result in jury trials. But I could get some more specific information for you, Senator Swellentrop.
So you don't necessarily have any extraordinary staffing needs to handle this bubble that's coming up or this load that's coming up, as long as they're beginning to occur and you can work through them with current staffing.
So we have asked for some money through the ARPA funding for senior judges and judges pro tem to hear some of those cases that are coming.
Thank you.
Senator Clay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to highlight something in your testimony because I think it's super important, and it's important not just in this budget, but many of the budgets when we're dealing with bringing pay up to market rates. And we did this in the past in a few of our budgets where a agency was brought up to market. We started to claw our way out of the hole with having so many vacancies, and then we would see that they weren't included in those normal cost of living adjustment raises that would happen. They were thought to have already received their raises. And then now we're seeing in some of the other agencies, I'll just pull one out of my hat, the Highway Patrol, for instance, where we brought them up. We started to see the recruitment and retention happening. We didn't include them in the cost of living adjustments, and now they're back down to not having the competitive pay that's necessary to maintain that program. So I do believe it's very important that when we go through this process, after we have brought people up to a market rate, that we maintain that market rate with those cost of living increases, not exclude them from raises when they happen across the board. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, thank you, Senator Clay. That's an important point I think we all agree with. So. Any other questions? Senator Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On your Part C, the new judge positions, what's the total dollar cost of that?
So new judges, so it's $3.5 million for new judges, and then the accompanying staff is at $1.5 million. So $5 million if you look at accompanying staff.
And does that mean the IT positions?
That means the 13 official court reporters and the 13 administrative assistants.
And what is the IT position?
So those 4 positions at the end, is that what you mean? Yes. I would have to, I'm sorry, I think it's around 400,000, but I would have to double check for you.
I assume that's, the governor just forwards that on to us and
Correct.
have subcommittees. We'll see all of that together. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your testimony. When I look at this National Center for State Courts to perform the workload study, that was done in 2020. Was that COVID? Did we have a problem on a balloon at that point and they started examining that, or did they look at this kind of pre-COVID?
It was,
Say what's really happening with that?
yes, the data was essentially pre-COVID.
Pre-COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And then my second question to you is that when I look at new judges, additional staff, regional IT, internal auditor, you know, a lot of stuff, what would be the most important to you out of that list?
Let me see. I mean, there is definitely a need for all of these. If you're looking, there's internal auditor and IT security. I mean, yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here today. I'd like to go back to Senator Solentrop's question. We know we've delayed cases during the COVID. And those cases still haven't been heard in some cases. So our normal cases, and then we put on top of that the COVID delayed cases, what delay, how much delay are we to expect from now on? I mean, are we in this budget, are you catching up so that we're going back to normal? Or do we still have the COVID cases that we're working through?
So in preparing the budget, we looked at, you know, what staffing level we would need, and we've asked for additional funding through ARPA for some of those judges, pro tem and senior judges, to help with the backlog, and some additional staffing in the ARPA funding, our request. So, but this budget is looking at continuing operations of what is needed going forward.
And not considering the backlog with COVID?
We have, I mean, yes.
It's already you've already taken that in consideration. That's what I heard.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Petty.
I was just curious, what went into the decision to decide to have magistrate judges in two areas where you hadn't had before?
So that was based on the data from the workload study and conversations with our chief judges in those districts as to, you know, what kind of cases, what kind of help do you need to, you know, help with the caseload.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Stephanie. Always appreciate your coming to before the Ways and Means and giving us great information. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next, we'll have a update on the Indigent Defense Services, and we'll have Heather Cessna, Executive Director of the Board of Indigent Defense Service. Welcome, committee, Heather.
Thank you very much for having me. Let me get situated here briefly, and then I can get started. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you very much for having us today. I'm Heather Cessna. I'm the Executive Director of the Kansas State Board of Indigent Defense Services. And I've brought with me today Cole Haaver, who is the Chief Public Defender in the North Central Regional Public Defender Office in Junction City. And we're here to talk to you today about salary and wage issues in the public defender system and on our assigned counsel side. I'm coordinating my slides, so you'll have to forgive me here for a second. Before we get into the details, though, I did want to kind of go over a little bit of what it is that we're going to talk about. We're going to identify our key problem, the overall need for an across-the-board pay adjustment to provide pay parity with prosecutors and other comparable government employees. We're also going to talk about the impact of this problem on our statutory mission, which is to provide effective and efficient defense services to our clients. And we're going to discuss the consequences of not adequately addressing the issue in a timely manner, which includes unsustainably high turnover rates, excessive and unethical caseloads, and experienced attorneys handling inappropriately high-level cases, and the collapse of our assigned counsel program. Then thankfully, we are going to talk about solutions. So that's the light at the end of this tunnel today.
Heather,
Yes,
excuse me, could you, before you start all that,
sure.
how did the increases last year impact you?
We did not get an increase to our salaries. What we got out of last year's budget was an increase to our assigned counsel panel program, which has helped to maintain many of the panel members that were on those panels. It has not been enough to get us the ability to recruit substantial numbers of new attorneys to those panels, which is really what we desperately need right now. So it has made a difference for our assigned counsel, the $100 an hour as opposed to the $80 an hour, but it has not been enough to get us, more of those people who have criminal law experience, but were not already serving on those panels. So we stopped the bleed, but we haven't been able to recruit as many new people in.
So zero.
No, I mean, we're desperately calling almost every day trying to find defense attorneys across the state to cover cases on those assigned counsel panels. And I will say part of the problem right now on that end is related to the backlog of cases from COVID, because there are a limited number of defense attorneys who are experienced enough, particularly to handle high-level cases. And as a result of that, they're getting overloaded with cases that are part of this bubble that we're trying to work through as a result of some of that backlog of COVID. However, we also have an aging attorney population in a lot of these particularly rural areas, but also in many of our urban areas where a lot of our traditional assigned counsel are, quite frankly, are leaving the practice. And there's not as many new ones coming in and getting trained up on those panels. And so that's overall going to be a longer term problem as well.
Thank you. Go ahead and proceed.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to answer those questions. And certainly if you think of others as we're going along, do not hesitate to jump in and interrupt me, because I'm always happy to stop and take an aside. I was grateful that we were called in to talk about these salary issues because I think this is particularly an important problem for us right now. I know a lot of other agencies have similar problems to ours that, everybody's struggling under a lack of pay parity with other government salaries or competing with private salaries, private firm salaries. But our agency in particular has a special problem, and that is that we have an unavoidable obligation under the Sixth Amendment to the United States Constitution to provide effective counsel to poor Kansans accused of crimes. And as a result, our salary issues have a hugely outsized impact on the criminal justice system here in Kansas, because as you heard from the previous conversation, being able to move those cases forward, being able to add additional judges into our judicial system only will make cases move forward as fast as you can have an attorney standing there in that courtroom next to those clients. And that's where we're really struggling right now, is having enough of those attorneys to go around. Our ongoing compensation issues have been a key factor in our struggle to fulfill that constitutional obligation. And the reason for that is simple. We're losing experienced employees faster than we can hire and train their replacements. And the reason that we're losing these employees is also fairly straightforward. It's a lack of pay parity with prosecutors and other comparable government salaries. It's also a lack of reliable year-to-year cost of living raises and consistent opportunities for merit raises. And just to be clear, when I say that we lack pay parity with other similarly situated professionals in our field, I'm not suggesting that we should be able to compete with starting salaries of big metropolitan firms like Shikardi and Bacon or Lathrop and Gage. I'm talking about salaries that are comparable to what our colleagues across the aisle in the same criminal courtrooms where we practice are paid by the local counties where we live. I also want to be clear that this is not just the fault of the governor's office or the legislature, that we also here at the Board of Indigent Defense Services bear a large part of the responsibility for this chronic and historical problem. To be completely frank, up until about 2020, we have done a historically poor job of articulating the depth of our problem to the legislature and to the Division of Budget and to the governor. And we have also failed historically to promote reasonably calculated solutions that would address the enormity of the issues that we have. Often we were proposing things that were too little too late. But since 2020, we have tried really hard to make that not a mistake that we make anymore. And you'll remember from the fall of 2020 is when we did present our report on the status of public defense in Kansas to the Legislative Budget Committee. That is still up on our website if you ever need to look back on it, and much of that information, while we need to continue to update it, is still very true today as it was when we did that last year, or 2 years ago now. So the obvious first question is, how do we know that compensation issues in particular are driving the turnover in our public defender system? And the answer to that is because our employees have told us so. For the last 2 years, in the summer, we've conducted agency-wide employee well-being surveys, and each year we ask the same questions of our employees. Specifically, why do you do this work? What most negatively impacts your work? Have you thought about leaving the agency within the last year? And if so, why? And consistently, around 80% of our employees report that they do this work because they believe in our mission. But over the last 2 years, in particular, our employees have consistently said that compensation issues and a lack of raises negatively impacts their work. But what's most disturbing about this trend is that over the last 2 years, the number of people who have said that they've considered leaving our agency within the last year has substantially increased. And specifically, those increases are tied to compensation and salary issues. So we know that our salary and wage issues are driving our turnover because our employees are explicitly telling us that even though they're mission-driven employees who come to our offices to do this work because they believe in the importance of the services we provide, that they're leaving us because of a lack of sufficient pay. But the evidence that they're telling us, that what they're telling us is true, is also clear. With very few exceptions, we are losing the vast majority of our employees to better paying similarly situated positions. Most specifically, about half of our turnover in fiscal year 2021 and in this first half of fiscal year 2022 has resulted from public defenders who specifically are leaving our offices in the public defender system to accept better paying jobs in local prosecutors' offices. In other words, the state of Kansas is paying to train new county employees across the state instead of maintaining those employees in the state system. So I did provide for you in my written testimony a series of comparable prosecutor salaries. So in the summer and fall of 2020, we did a series of open records request acts for prosecutors' offices across the state to collect salary information so that we could do a comparison of prosecutor salaries to see where we were falling short. What I provided for you is just 3 of those counties, but I do have more specific information for counties across the state. If there's something specific you'd like to see, I'd be happy to provide that later. The ones that I provided in the written testimony are for Shawnee, Sedgwick, and Johnson County, where we have comparable prosecutors' offices and public defenders' offices. And I provided the salary information for both our public defenders' offices and the prosecutors' offices. What you will need to keep in mind as you're looking at those comparables is how much it literally costs the state when we lose experienced employees. In fiscal year 2021, for example, we lost 14 experienced public defenders, which, and by experience, I mean 5 years of experience or more, so they're handling high-level cases. That will cost our board in 5 years of experience and training and another $3.9 million just in base salaries at starting salary level to retrain new defenders to take on those high-level cases that those defenders were handling. And that still doesn't really replace the actual experience that we're losing when we have experienced employees that have been with our agency for 15 or 20 years. It would not have cost the state anywhere near that much for those 14 employees to have sustained them with reasonable cost of living adjustments and raises over the last few years. The trend that you'll see when looking at those comparisons is that while starting salaries for new public defenders may be relatively competitive with prosecutors' offices, once you get any kind of significant experience, the prosecutor salaries very quickly outpace our public defenders once they've got a few jury trials and things under their belt. The fact is that 85% of criminal cases in Kansas require appointed counsel. So if you want to practice criminal law in Kansas and get a lot of courtroom experience, your two main options are going to be to go to a prosecutor's office or a public defender's office. So that's really where our main competition comes from. When you're a young attorney paying off school loans, trying to get married and buy a house and have kids and pay for daycare, those salary differences are huge, and that's where we're losing people. Unlike other agencies, our complicating factor here is that our ability to fund pay scale adjustments is extremely limited. Our revenues are primarily from state general funds, and this is because user fees and things like that oftentimes other agencies are able to rely upon to help supplement these sorts of things, even when there's not a year that they get raises from the legislature, is not an option for us because our clients are, by their very definition, impoverished. And so user fees in our system are not available to us. Unlike other prosecutors' offices that can go directly to their county commissions or other agencies that have other opportunities for revenue, our agency is specifically reliant upon the governor and the legislature to fund our pay adjustments year to year. At its most basic, our problem really is suffering chronic, sustained high rates of turnover right now, with experienced defenders leaving as a result of our lagging pay rates and lack of reliable cost of living raises. The problem is not new, as I kind of alluded to earlier. It's been happening for many years, but it's been definitely exacerbated by the impact of the pandemic because of the pressure of the additional caseloads and the backlog of cases that are now moving, in addition to just the stresses of trying to practice in your local jails and things like that during pandemic outbreaks. But it has been chronic also for so long that we've essentially lost an entire generation of lawyers who have left our agency for better pay and employment. So like those people who now would be rising into the ranks of leadership within our offices are just in large part not there anymore, which causes sustained problems for our agency going forward. As a result, we lack a significant number of highly experienced defenders to handle our high-level cases, and that really leaves us with three options. First, we can give inexperienced attorneys who are not qualified and competent to handle high-level cases, or we could overload the experienced attorneys that are left with far more high-level cases than they can ethically handle. Or our third option, and really the only viable option, is that we use our statutory authority to refuse cases in our public defender's offices due to high caseload and turnover. And that's what you've been seeing over the last few years in in a much more consistent manner. Obviously, that's not ideal. We don't want to refuse cases. We want to be able to be sufficiently staffed. But when we have these high turnover rates, we do have an ethical obligation to control our caseloads, both for our attorney's sake and for our client's sake. And so these cases get offloaded to our assigned counsel panels when our public defenders cannot take them. This has a cascade of consequences, though. Not only do we still have potentially excessive public defender closures to new cases, but the offloading of those cases to our assigned counsel panels becomes very problematic because our assigned counsel panels become overloaded. Our assigned counsel then turn around and leave our panels or have to temporarily refuse cases themselves because they have an ethical obligation to also control their own caseloads. And quite frankly, that leads to the very real and potentially total collapse of our public defender system. Because if we don't have enough attorneys to handle cases, then we either have to start dismissing cases or we end up being subjected to lawsuits as a result of not being able to fulfill our constitutional obligation. And to be clear, these are not theoretical consequences that I'm talking about. These consequences are happening right now in real time to actual cases and actual clients in our district court across the state as we speak. There are currently in Sedgwick County 2 attorneys left on our appointments panel who are taking appointments above severity level 4s in Wichita. On Monday, the Topeka Bar Association sent out a all-call plea for attorneys here in the Shawnee County area with little to no experience to sign up on their assigned counsel panel because of the shortages that they have meeting their obligations because of our public defender office closures and the number of cases that they have. And so this is one of the reasons why I also brought our chief public defender from Junction, Cole Haaver, with me today to talk about these issues, and so that he can tell you a little bit of the impact of what something like that happens when something like this is happening to his specific office and how that works. So Cole, do you mind talking for a few minutes?
Thank you, Heather.
Good morning, Cole.
Good morning. Thanks for hearing me today.
Please state your name for the,
Sure. My name is Cole Haaver. I'm the Chief Public Defender in Junction City, Kansas. So we've been talking about a lot of these things like the judiciary budget and the budget for bids from a macro level. And I want to really zoom it into one particular office, the office I run in Junction City. This is a frontline trial office. We're in the trenches every day, going to court, representing clients. And my office normally has 11 attorneys. So that's when we're fully staffed. And with those 11 attorneys, I handle 5 cases, the felony appointments, 5 counties, Geary County, Riley County, Morris County, Clay County, and Dickinson County. So between those 11 attorneys, I have to handle all of those counties. Some of them have more cases than others, obviously. Normally, my office has around 350 felony cases for those 11 attorneys. Now, there were some questions by Senator Solentrop about backlog. Right now, we are backlogged to some degree. I'd say we're running around 375 to 400 cases, which is a little high, but that's mostly COVID related. In calendar year 2021, this past year, of those 11 attorneys, I had 7 attorneys resign. So 7 out of 11 gone out of the office. Now, 3 of these were because people's spouses were relocating, their family was relocating. Not much you can do about that. But 4 of them were directly related to individuals who are staying here in the state and got a salary increase somewhere else. 1 was to a different government agency, but 3 were directly to prosecutors' offices. I want to just briefly talk about those 3 people. One attorney, the second one to leave the office this year, this is a gentleman who had 14 years criminal law experience. He graduated law school the same year I did. So he, in many ways, he even had more experience than I did, and I was running the office. Excellent trial attorney. I could give him any type of case, rape case, murder case, basically anything up to a capital murder case he could handle. Excellent asset for the office. He's now working at the Douglas County Attorney's Office, and they essentially offered him a salary that it wasn't even worth us sitting down and having a conversation about whether bids could match it, because it was more than what I, as the chief, was making, or virtually anyone else in our system was making. Another one was an attorney with about 3 years of experience, and she is someone who was a military spouse, still had student loans from about 20 years ago that she was trying to pay. And ultimately, she's offered a job at the Dickinson County Attorney's Office, again, at a salary that we just frankly couldn't match. And this is important when you lose people, number one, at that experience level, but second, around this 3-year mark, we're putting in a lot of time and effort to train those folks. And once they've had about that 3 years of experience, now is just the time that they can really start to handle their own caseload with, I don't want to say micromanaging, because you certainly don't want to micromanage people, but looking over their shoulder and making sure everything's done right and putting all the time in. You can just trust them to know what they're doing and go and do it. The last one I want to talk about is maybe the most alarming. This is a gentleman who only had 1 year of experience. He came to my office, he worked there a year. Promising young attorney. I personally put in a lot of time and effort training this young man. We had a rape trial last year, and I had him second chair it, because one of the things, you learn a lot of things in law school, but not really how to actually practice law in a trial setting. I had him second chair a rape trial with me because he needed to learn that so that he could represent our clients moving forward. And frankly, I could have done this rape trial myself quicker. It would have taken less of my time, but I wanted him to learn all those things so that in the future, he could handle his own trials as a first chair. And within 1 year, he's offered a position right across the street from my office at the Geary County Attorney's Office with a salary that, again, we couldn't match. It would have frankly put him above all of the attorneys in our office who weren't in leadership management positions with just 1 year experience that I'd given him. The impact that has on our office with all these attorneys leaving and our inability to hire new attorneys at the current salary structure can't be understated. Right now I'm down 4 attorneys. And frankly, since I've been chief, that's unprecedented. I've never been down that far before. In June, we had 6 attorneys in Geary County. That's what I'm primarily going to talk about now is Geary County. 6 attorneys handling all of Geary County, approximately 250 cases. By November, when this last attorney I talked about resigned, I now had 2 attorneys to handle a similar caseload. Now, over that period of time, the only option really available to me was to shut down the office from taking more cases in Geary County to protect the attorneys I had left from excessive caseloads. But when we do that, like Heather said, the only thing we can do is offload the cases that we would have gotten to contract counsel. And like Heather said, they quickly became overloaded. There's only so many of them. So right now, I'm not exaggerating when I say we're having to pay attorneys to come all the way from Kansas City to Junction City to handle cases in Junction City. And nowadays, some of that can be alleviated to some degree with Zoom. Sometimes they appear by Zoom, but there are hearings you have to be there for. Sentencings, prelims, trials, and we're having to pay window time all the way from Kansas City because frankly, at this point, we have no other option. Another thing that's exacerbated the problem is in the past, even though we've lost attorneys, we've always been able to hire new ones. And again, these might be people that are more inexperienced than the people you're losing, but now that's not the case. I've had some of these positions posted since early in 2021. We're now approaching 12 months. And in that 12-month time frame, I've had 1 outside candidate apply for any of those jobs. I offered this young man a job. He ultimately accepted a job somewhere else. Senator Billinger, you asked a question to Heather right when she started about the money, the appropriations from last year and the effect it's had. One of the other things that was appropriated was funding for more positions. And that's greatly appreciated, and it is something that's needed. But essentially, for me, that just means now I was allocated 1 more position. Now I have 5 positions to fill on top, 1 more on top of the 4 I couldn't fill to begin with. So while appreciated, it hasn't really changed the calculus for me at all. So I'm still in this situation where in this past year and into this year, I've had to shut down taking appointments in Geary County for more days just now, based on this situation, than I had to in all the counties I serve combined since I've been chief in the last 6 years. And without more attorneys coming to the office to replace the ones we've lost and replace the experience we've lost, we might be able to open periodically, but with only 2 attorneys to handle Geary County, it might be for 30 days, and then we're going to have to shut down again. And without new people coming into the system, I don't really see any end in sight. So I'm going to turn it, well, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have, and then I'd like to turn it back over to Heather to talk about solutions to the problem.
Cole, just one quick question, and then I'll see if anyone else has some.
Sure.
So when you're paying these traveling attorneys, we'll call them, that come in from Kansas City, where do you get this funding from?
That's from the contract council funding, essentially the funding that you were talking about with Heather earlier that went from $80 to $100. I think it's part of BID's overall budget, but it's just the part allocated to contract council.
So the money did help a little bit on that side. Okay. Other questions for Cole? Senator Kirshen?
Chairman, thank you for your exposing what your problem you have there. I understand. I have a question. Do you have the flexibility? Say you said you had 7 attorneys, 4 of them quit or left. So you're down to 3. That's no longer a budget expense if they're gone, if you're not replacing them. Can you use the money that and hire 2 back at a better rate with the money you didn't want to have to spend? I mean, how flexible are you with your,
You're right. There could be some savings, like the first gentleman I talked about. He was earning something on the higher end of the salary scale because he had 14 years experience. And yeah, there is some budget savings in hiring someone new. However, that's tempered by the fact that really for those first 3 years, you're to some degree paying to train that person. You don't actually get as much mileage out of them because they aren't experienced. So in some sense, I'm not sure you're getting quite the bang for your buck as having someone who's experienced.
doubt that. I mean, but I'm saying the money budgeted for 7 people, now you're paying 3.
Sure.
And then the other 4, I mean, if you only hired 2, you still have.
Well, we had money budgeted for 11 and now we have 7. But essentially when I shut down the office, these cases don't quit coming. You know, people are still getting arrested, the cases are still getting filed. They have to go somewhere. So essentially, they're just going to go to this contract counsel panel. And most years, that's more expensive. It's cheaper to handle it in-house than to pay $100 an hour to contract counsel, especially if they have to drive from Kansas City, which is what we're seeing now.
And I can answer that a little more specifically.
Sure, okay, that's fine, thank you.
Yes.
Senator Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Haaver, thank you for being here. When you say that you have to close the office down, I mean, you don't shut the office, but you take no new cases for 180 days because you don't have the attorneys?
That's accurate, yes.
And so a person gets arrested in Geary County and you have to hire outside counsel. Who does that? Does the bids office do that? Do you do that? And how do you find that attorney in Kansas City to get them to take that case?
So these are the contract counsels, what we're talking about. So essentially, these are attorneys, individuals who have agreed to be on the contract. The gentleman who actually does it is Mr. Brandon Barrett, who's sitting right back here. And I know Brandon was working the phone extensively to find these attorneys because, for example, in Geary County, Junction City, right now there's one attorney with an office there who does that kind of work. And once her caseload was full, we went to Manhattan. And there's a couple, 2, 3 there that do it. And once they got full, then we start having to broaden our net and find people from all over the place to come to Junction City to handle cases.
So is Brandon in Topeka or is he in your office?
Brandon works in Topeka at the administrative office with Heather.
But I used to work with him in that office.
Okay,
He used to work for me, yes.
great to have you in Junction City, yes. But so what happens then? Let's say you have a person, they commit a crime, they get arrested, they're in jail, they need a counsel, we don't have anybody. Does the judge put the trial off or the preliminary hearing? How does that work, and does that happen very often in this situation?
That's a fantastic question, and that's something that keeps me awake at night. What happens if the system just collapses? And I think what Heather's trying to tell everybody is that in some counties at least, and Geary County would be a good example, we're on the brink of that collapse. I can't tell you exactly what will happen because it hadn't happened yet. I can tell you what happened in Missouri because I read about it in the newspapers where attorneys went to the judges, said, I can't take new cases, and the judges said, we don't care, here's more cases. Because there was no other solution. There weren't any other attorneys. I don't know how it would get handled in Geary County. I'm not sure the judges would do that or not. But if you're a judge and you have someone sitting in jail without an attorney, they need their bond addressed. They need the case to move forward. The judge wants their docket to move forward. What do you do? And I don't think there's a good answer for that.
I do have a silly question.
Okay, go ahead.
Chair has to suffer through me sometimes. So you can't get an attorney. You could represent yourself. If you represent yourself, do you get the $100 an hour?
That'd probably be a Heather question.
Yes. So, thank you.
No problem.
Try not to get arrested.
Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a follow-up to Senator Hawk. No. As I sat and listened to this, when you look at your HR and your tools in the box of how you get somebody to come, do you guys ever, like graduating people out of the universities in Kansas, maybe go to them? It's just a thought, proactively saying, hey, we'll help you with your debt load. You're going to give us so many years of service.
That's
Ever
not,
tried anything like that?
I think that'd be a fantastic idea. I'm not sure that's something that's ever been budgeted in the past or,
Just a thought with that. That would kind of keep them that way. And then the other thing is like performance pay. You know, I think if you're going to have good ones and bad ones that come in,
sure.
having the flexibility to take care of the good ones, and longevity pay. You know, so those are just some thoughts that I have. Instead of just saying, hey, we need more money to pay, that might be some things to think about.
I agree with you, and I've had conversations with Heather about those very things, and I think she can address them in more detail.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I understood earlier, your panel attorneys went from $60 an hour to $80 an hour, or was it 80 to 100?
80 to 100.
80 to 100. Okay, so that's about a 25% increase for that. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And I go back to Senator Kirschen's question. The budget, you have budgeted for 11 attorneys. Is that correct?
Correct.
Today you only have 4.
Seven.
Excuse me. So you're under by 4, what happens to that money?
There, we'll let Heather
Yeah.
answer that one.
Let me explain a little bit. So because that is a good question. That is and I was going to answer both of that. So when we have somebody leave the office and let's say they vacated a position that was paid more than the minimum salary, so more than our starting salary, there is some cost savings. One of the problems that we can potentially turn that around and use that to help aid with a raise for somebody else for like a merit raise or something like that. One of the problems that we have across the board in our agency is that our salaries have been so suppressed for so long that that's literally like finding change in the couch cushions. It's not enough to address the widespread problem that we have, and frequently the people who are leaving are people who are 3, 4, 5 years in and who are still making starting salary, because that's why they are leaving. Because we haven't been able to give across the board raises, or the little bit of savings that we've had from people leaving better paid positions hasn't been enough to be able to do the across the board fix that we need to do, because the competitive salaries from the prosecutor's offices have just so quickly outpaced us. And so, what savings we have from unfilled positions for a period of time is just a one-time cost savings. And so we can't give raises out of those one-time cost savings, like if we have an empty position that's not filled for so many months, because we can't continue that forward if we do fill that position in years after years. So the only savings that we have to be able to give those raises is if we actually if somebody leaves at a higher salary and we fill that position at a lower salary, and then we've got the little bit of cushion. It's just, like I said, it's the volume of the problem that we have that makes that just not a viable option.
I've got one more question, and it's, maybe I'm not, so let's assume that you win the case as a public defender. Is there any restitution paid by your client?
We do recoup some costs if our clients are able to pay on restitution. I mean, one of the difficulties that we have is that our clients are, by their definition, impoverished. So, I mean, you're not going to get oftentimes a lot, or even any sometimes, in restitution costs and things like that. But we do recoup some costs from that. It's just not very much compared to the need across the board.
Thank you.
And I thought I didn't want to interrupt if you've got a question, Senator McGinn.
Senator McGinn.
Sorry.
No, back to Senator Hawks' comment.
Yeah.
When the judges give you more cases, well, then there's two things that'll happen. One, if they can't get the cases to the courtroom to defend, they either stay in jail or they get let out of jail. Yeah. Or the counties end up having to negotiate with other counties and pay more to use empty beds in other counties. I mean, if you can't get to them, you can't get to them. So you're either in jail or you're not in jail.
Yeah, and Cole alluded to sort of the circumstances that were happening in the Missouri public defender system. So the Missouri public defender system had an overload of cases. They don't have the authority to refuse cases the way that we do here in Kansas, which is a very vitally important distinction between us and the Missouri system. And so, I mean, they ended up overloading their attorneys with unethical caseloads, and they basically told their attorneys, either you continue doing all these unethical caseloads or you quit. Well, as you can imagine, that was not a professionally acceptable alternative for those licensed attorneys. The other thing that happened was a series of wait lists, which was found to be unconstitutional, I believe. And so, they've been injected with some additional money to fund some additional positions. And one of the problems that we have is that we need additional positions on top of being able to keep our current employees in our system. So in order to meet our caseload. So losing employees is a problem, but also then on top of that, we still need a significant number of new employees in order to deal with our normal non-pandemic caseloads. I know we're running short on time, so I'll go ahead and keep going here and wrap this up pretty quickly, if that's okay with you, Chairman.
Yes, please do.
So our solution to this is I mean, it is fairly simple. We need to reset our baseline. That is what our number one budget request is for fiscal year 2023, is a 3.9 million request to convert our pay scale. Basically what happened was we did a series of core requests. We got a whole bunch of information about competitive prosecutor salaries. We created a pay scale conversion that our board voted on and passed in for the 2022 budget, and again for the budget in 2023. So this is the second year that we've made this request to the legislature for this adjustment. And this year it does come with the governor's $3.9 million recommendation. So what we're going to ask is for you to look at that enhancement request this year so that we can convert our current employees into a pay scale that is more competitive with our prosecutor counterparts and other government salaries. But the other part of that is to ensure that the legislature continues to look, as Senator Clay talked about earlier, the importance of continuing to keep up with those cost of living raises and to fund future budget requests when we come asking for an enhancement to fund merit raises and things like that. Because again, we're very limited in our ability to be able to continue to raise those salaries year after year without the legislature's specific funding for that purpose. So we need to reset our baseline, and then we need an ongoing commitment from the legislature to continue to look at those issues. Our 85% of the cases in Kansas that are criminal require appointed counsel, and we provide all of those counsel from either our public defender's offices or our assigned counsel. So that has a huge outsized impact on the adjustment of the criminal justice system in Kansas. Without a healthy public defender system, you're not going to have a functioning criminal justice system in Kansas. 23 new judges for the judiciary sounds wonderful, but my immediate thought was, how many defense attorneys do I have to fill those courtrooms? And the answer is not enough, either on our public defender side or our assigned counsel side. So this is a fundamental thing for us to look at this year. Obviously, you've already had questions, but I'm always happy to answer any more if you do. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Heather. Just one quick one. If we do get the funding put in there, will you get any of these folks back, you suppose, that went through the prosecutors? Or, I mean, if your salary got up high enough, will we be flopping people back and forth any? Or you think they just have to still continue to find someone, spend 3 years training them, and then hope you can keep them? Sure.
I think there's a possibility we could get some of them back. Some of the folks I've lost over the years really liked working at our office. I really liked working with them. I think they liked working with me. And I don't think it was I want to do something different decision. It was, I have to do the right thing for my family and my mortgage decision. And if they could, given the choice between prosecuting and doing the defense work, they were in defense to begin with because that's what they wanted to do. And I think if it was competitive enough, I'm not telling you we'd get everyone back. That's unrealistic, but perhaps some.
Okay, thank you a lot. Other questions? Senator Hawk. Short.
Yes. I just want to make sure I understand the structure we're under, and I think I do. The governor passes the judicial budget on to the legislature, I think by statute. That's not the case with bids, is that correct? You're not part of the judicial budget.
No.
Completely separate.
Right, we're part of the executive branch, and so we went through the division of budget process and got recommendations from them, and then the governor did her recommendations for us as well.
And she did recommend your enhancement for 22 and also the 23.
The enhancement this year is for fiscal year 2023, so it'll start July 1st. And it is, she recommended several other things too, but this particular enhancement for the pay scale adjustment, she recommended 3.9 million out of our first request there for our first enhancement.
Great, I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was short.
It was, thank you. So are you part of the overall budget increase then also, or not?
I don't believe that we've been accepted out of that. And my comment on that is that I don't think we should be accepted out of that. And one of the reasons why is because this particular pay scale was based on a series of core requests that we did back in 2020. So, I mean, if we're adjusted and left off of the overall adjustment, my argument would be that we would still be sort of that one step behind problem that we have. Certainly, though, at this point, I mean, I am more than happy to take whatever the legislature is willing to give us because we are desperately in need. So, that's not to discourage you from looking at this, but I would argue that what our request is based on is already a little bit dated.
Well, that's why I was getting at, because, if you said you needed 3.9 to be up to where you needed to be, that's 3.9. The additional 5% would be over and above what you needed to get into compliance. Am I looking at this wrong?
No, I think you're looking at that right.
Okay. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you a lot. Appreciate you coming over from Junction City, Cole, and Heather, thank you. Important stuff, and we appreciate it. We'll try to do our best.
Thank you.
Committee, if there's nothing else, Nancy, we're good, right? Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you.